Morning. This is October 27th, I believe. And today I'll talk about the Southern Hemisphere for a change. But allow me a couple of editorial comments. Here we are in sunny Santa Cruz, most of us, with horrendous hurricane winds in the Caribbean. And if we were a helpful country, we would have been helping Jamaica in the last few days. But of course, we are busy elsewhere. Then our president, of course, is in the Far East, which is not what I'm going to talk about today. But it's kind of useful to know that he said he negotiated another conflict, another notch in his belt of having stopped conflicts, this one between Thailand and Cambodia. The problem with all of this is that both the Thais and the Cambodians say the conflict is not over. All he accomplished was to get them to remove some tanks and so forth from the border. But the conflict is not over. But we're to believe that it's yet another conflict that he has resolved. On his way, hopefully, he thinks, to the next Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, so horrendous things are happening also in this country. As you know, what's been in the news has been all this business about the East Wing reconstruction, which is now said to be costing $350 million, all contributed by foundations of one kind or another, or businesses actually. Corporations. And I'm thinking, and perhaps this is loose and editorial thinking on my part, that thousands, actually millions, of government employees are not getting their paychecks and having to go to food banks because the government is closed. And I was just thinking, why don't the corporations give the $350 million for the East Wing and then contribute a few $1,000,000 along the line to some of the food banks so that the federal employees have something to eat? Just a random thought on this sunny day in Santa Cruz. Okay, typically the Southern Hemisphere doesn't get much attention. I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis did in the Caribbean and so forth. But now here we are having shot down, I think it's 9 now, boats in international waters because they're presumed to be drug cartel shipments. We don't know for sure that that's what they were all doing. Some might have been a fishing boat or two. And as you probably heard on the news, international waters are not a place that you can just decide to shoot down boats. There is international law going back to the 19th century and certainly embedded in law of the seas in the 1950s, which has strict rules about territorial waters, how many miles off your coastline, but the open oceans are international waters. And I suppose if there is a war going on and a declared war, international declared war among states, you can also battle in the open oceans. But there is no war. There is a war against drugs. It's a unilateral declared war by the United States. And everyone, including right-wing conservative legislators, lawyers, etc., say that what Trump is doing in the oceans is totally illegal. Even if one imagines these smallish boats could have been stopped and examined, but certainly killing the people on the boats and sinking them is illegal by any standards of international law. And just to repeat myself, many of the right-wing law professors as well as members of Congress who are Republicans have stated outright that they agree that what the Trump administration was doing is illegal. Now, of course, we were doing it because there is a war on drugs, but a war on drugs is not an international, interstate war. It is essentially using the word war by saying we want to oppose drugs coming to the United States. So the first issue that was raised was that these ships were being attacked by the US because they were carrying fentanyl off the coasts in international waters of Venezuela. Turns out Venezuela doesn't produce fentanyl. We targeted the wrong state. Fentanyl comes from Colombia and Mexico and so forth, but fentanyl is not anything that is produced in Venezuela. Then we said, well, oops, never mind, but they do export cocaine, and even cocaine does not get exported to the US in large quantities from Venezuela. So the accusations we made or justifications why we can shoot down these ships and kill all those people on these small boats was to begin with not accurate in terms of what Venezuela does or does not do. Now, Venezuela, of course, is a very bad authoritarian regime. That's perfectly clear. But there are lots of bad authoritarian regimes in the world, and you can't just, shoot their boats in the international waters. So then it was pointed out to the Trump administration that it wasn't fentanyl, and in any event, even not a lot of cocaine, that the cocaine comes from Colombia. So then we accused Colombia, and Colombian ships typically don't go through the Mediterranean, but rather the Pacific Ocean. So now we say to Colombia, we can shoot those down. Well, to begin with, the fact that cocaine is both produced and exported from Colombia is absolutely true. But the way the administration went about it led the president of Colombia to say, not so fast, stop interfering in our country. So now we have a conflict with both Venezuela and Colombia. And the oddity of that is that while Venezuela is an authoritarian government, which everybody, including the United States, hope can fall, you might have noticed that the opposition leader received the Nobel Peace Prize. The fact of the matter is that Colombia has actually been the US closest ally even though it has been a major cocaine grower and exporter. Well, needless to say, the president has now has a breach with the United States. So now we're in conflict with both Venezuela and Colombia. Colombia being at odds with Colombia and ceasing diplomatic relations, etc., is not such a good thing, as I pointed out, because Colombia, for a variety of reasons, has had democratic elections and so forth and so on, is not a very good state to make persona non grata in Latin America, where quite a few states now are not viewing the United States very positively. So we're, in terms of Colombia, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot rather than having reasonable policies about the cocaine export and so on. Well, now, of course, we've escalated the conflict with Venezuela, and now we've sent battleships and airplanes and whatnot, all monitoring Venezuela, so to speak. And it looks like there'll be an invasion of Venezuela. Well, there might not actually an invasion of Venezuela, but what we are doing is, number one, using massive U.S. military resource to go out there. And second of all, the administration is beginning to threaten that this may not just all be threats from the oceans, but we may actually wish to invade. Well, we may actually wish to invade has to some extent already happened, and we made it public. Namely, we were sending CIA people in fairly large numbers into Venezuela to try to help to bring down the government. So if you look at, if you're coming from outer space, let us say, and you're looking at the situation, it looks like there's going to be a massive invasion of Venezuela with all these military resources going there and sitting out there, and it is unclear whether we literally will land on the land in Venezuela, or we're just threatening them and using our air capacity, drones, missiles, God knows what, to attack Venezuela from the outside while sitting in international waters. In any event, by any standard of any country, including rather conservative American legislators, as well as fairly friendly countries to the United States, none of what we're currently doing is legal. There is nothing legal about it. So the problem becomes, if we in the United States can do anything and use our, excessive military capacity in something like this, even if we don't like the regime, who's to stop somebody else from doing it in the future? And what kind of image does it give the United States, which heretofore has prided itself on military actions here, there, and yonder, but all within the realm of some legality? So we've become the most powerful military country in the world, but at the moment, if you came down from Mars, you would say, now there is a rogue country. We've essentially gone rogue. So what is there to stop any of the use activity? Well, to begin with, of course, you've learned that the press is no longer going to the Pentagon to interview people about this, because they were asked to sign a pledge, which was invading their First Amendment rights as a press. Now you have a few right-wing press companies in the Pentagon, but the normal military press corps that is in the Pentagon. First, they lost their offices, and now they lost their capacity to even go into the Pentagon. The other thing is creating a conflict is one thing. Creating a war and acting as we are outside of Venezuela right now, that we are now at war with Venezuela. You can't just, as president, declare a war on drugs is equivalent in international law to a war, interstate war, because for states there are some rules. And if we were to actually invade Venezuela in some fashion, that would require a war declaration from Congress. So interestingly, right now, even conservative, and I don't just mean a few sort of right-wing cuckoo birds in the Republican Party, but even sort of right-of-center Republican legislators are speaking up and saying the war powers are given to the Congress. We have to declare war. Trump can just go out there and declare war, whether it's a war on drugs or a war on drugs anyway is not international legal terminology for interstate conflict, or for that matter, a war on any state, be it Venezuela or somebody else, without getting the approval of Congress. So while overall we can say that the Republicans in Congress have laid down for months now and let Trump do anything they want, and now that the government is shut down, they're not engaged in anything. that actually Congress is about to speak up and look at its constitution and saying what Trump is doing is not constitutional by any stretch of anybody's imagination. Well, now you can say, well, as long as he can get away with it, who's going to stop him? That's actually a good point, because so far nobody stopped Trump doing anything. And even if Congress would go back in session and oppose a declaration of war, for example, against the state of Venezuela, it might not be voted for. Then what is the president going to do? Well, the president doesn't have to listen to anybody, according to him. There is a sort of an interesting wrinkle about how he feels that he makes peace and how wars end. This is unrelated to Latin America for a moment. There has been actually a shooting conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. And Trump has just been there, and he's declared, I think yesterday, that yet he stopped yet another war. The conflict has ended. Oddly, the government officials in Thailand in particular, but to some extent in Cambodia, saying no such thing. We agreed to move some tanks and stuff, but the conflict has not ended, and no end of the conflict has been declared, even though Trump has said, another conflict resolution brownie points to my 6 or 7 other wars that I stopped. So it's not even the case anymore that the conflicting parties agree that the so-called conflicts that Trump claims he has stopped, that he's actually stopped. Anyway, getting back to Latin America. So we have this really hot, very dangerous situation out there in both now the Pacific and in the Caribbean with respect to Venezuela, the resolution of which is by no means clear. And of course, we have been in conflict with Brazil, you will recall, because Bolsonaro, who was the previous sort of Trump-like dictator of Brazil, is somebody who is now not only out of office, but in jail. And we told the current Brazilian government that he needs to be sprung loose, and they refused to do so. And so we have laid huge 100%, 50%, whatnot, tariffs on everything Brazilian coming to the United States. That's not good in some ways for U.S. trade. In the meantime, we have done all kinds of things to American farmers who are not able to export their goods to China and other places. And one of the big consumers of American soya beans has been China. So huge numbers of American soybean farmers are no longer exporting to China because we've laid this 100% tariff on China. So, or even more, depending on which day you talk about. So China decided, well, we'll find an alternative. And the alternative is Brazil. So they're now importing, China is importing soya beans from Brazil. Good for the Brazilian economy, not so good for American farmers, which incidentally are mostly Republican supporters. So this is not a helpful situation. So I will get back to this in a minute, but let me move right along to Argentina. So Trump has decided Argentina is our pal, and the Prime Minister of Argentina, Mr. Milei, is he's a populist, but somewhat Trump-like figure, although he's not like Trump, he's a rather sophisticated economist. And we have made a deal with Argentina, which is they are in financial disarray. And Argentina has been borrowing money for years from the International Monetary Fund, but they sort of run out of that option largely. So we have just given billions of dollars to Argentina to bail out the government. Billions of dollars, I might say, which is not going to help Americans or American farmers or unemployed civil servants or some, but $350 billion here, there, whatever, have been, it probably goes up to $450 billion eventually, have been handed to Argentina to help the government there. Indeed, it has had that impact because there was a legislative election in Argentina a day ago, and it was possible that the current prime minister would not be reelected, but in fact, in which case, the Trump administration says, well, then we're not going to give the new government money. Well, in fact, the Argentinians voted for the current person, who is not up for re-election, but the parliament was. And so we can go ahead and give them all their billions of dollars because now we have a friendly government. Why do we like the government in Argentina? We don't like the government in Colombia and in Brazil and in other places, even though the government in Colombia is democratically elected, ditto in Brazil. Well, because he is sort of a pro-Trump right-winger, but something that hasn't been mentioned in the papers, which I want to add, is also that essentially Argentina is a white country, and we like white countries. And we like, just a sidebar here, we have announced that the quotas for legal immigrants will largely be shuffled to white immigrants. We don't want any more brown or black people. And one of the big chunks for immigration goes to the white Afrikaners in South Africa, who are now minorities since black South African, who are the vast majority, are now running the country. So we now are claiming that the Afrikaners are discriminated against. In fact, Trump has claimed there's genocide against them. No, there is no genocide against them, but some of them have lost some portion of their huge farms that they were meant to share with some of the black African workers on them, etc. But no one has claimed, other than Trump, that there's genocide going on against whites. But in any event, we now have a policy which is formalized both for the purposes of our friendship and support of Argentina, which partly has to do with populist right-wing politics, but also has to do with the fact that we identify with white people, but we don't much care about brown people anymore. We want to keep those out as much as possible. So preference in our immigration policy will be given to white people. Now look at how this looks in the rest of Latin America. I mean, the degree to which people are of Spanish origin or indigenous origin or mixed differs hugely from country to country, right? There may be more people of European origin in Chile than there are Peru and Ecuador and in Brazil, let's say. So I don't want to, have a detailed discussion about Latin America here, but our disposition now is a racist disposition. We support white people, white countries, and we want to keep brown people out of this country. And of course, we're also exporting, supposedly illegal refugees, but from the country. But we're also, as you know, sending legal immigrants away. They have trouble proving that they're American citizens, born American citizen, naturalized citizens, and so forth. What I want to say here is that the policy of the US government in Latin America is not just anti-authoritarian leaders and we are entitled to overthrow them if we want to, but rather is racist in the extreme. And one more comment on Argentina, along with our benefits of financial help in Argentina, we've also made arrangements for Argentina beef to be imported in fairly large quantities to the United States. This does not help the cattle industry and the American beef industry, right? To begin with, beef is now very expensive, so fewer people are able to afford to eat it. But in point of fact, we are helping the beef industry in Argentina for political reasons of the Trump administration, and we're hurting the beef industry in the United States. So the farmers who grow some grains and soybeans, as well as the cattle industry in the United States, is badly harmed. In addition, of course, that farm workers very often and slaughterhouse workers very often are people who are immigrants, some of them illegal immigrants, who are doing this quote unquote shit work. And so some of the slaughterhouses are also in the United States are also in difficulty because their workers are being sent out of the country and arrested. What I'm painting here is that on the one hand, there is a laser focus on we want to get rid of the government, admittedly very authoritarian and awful government in Venezuela. And on the other hand, we're doing all kinds of things in Latin America, which not only hurts our future relations with other Latin American countries, but hurts our economies and hurts our reputation as a country which will behave legally. And I can't emphasize enough, because I've mentioned it several times now, the illegality of what the US is doing with respect to Venezuela and increasingly Colombia in terms of shooting down these boats and killing people out there in the ocean. It is so illegal and so breaking with rules of the high sea and international law that even normally states or statesmen who tend to be right-wing or to look at the Trump administration semi-favorably are now absolutely alarmed. So we have become, sad to say, from the international perspective, not from our American perspective, a rogue country. We're behaving like a rogue country. And you will say, well, all right, so we're doing this, and maybe when Congress comes back in session, they'll do something about it, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we can't put the genie back in the bottle on this particular one. It is the largest country in the world which has preached democracy and legal behavior all over the world, which has allowed the illegal actions, crimes against humanity, etc., to take place in Gaza by supporting Israel's decimating this population and the infrastructure, buildings, and so forth in Gaza. We are doing it in terms of trade. We are isolating a country that is an nasty authoritarian country, which is fair enough. Venezuela is that. And we're going to say, we are going to take care of this problem. And in the process of taking care of this problem, we will break any number of other international laws. In other words, we're not going to be a law-abiding international actor. And this comes from our country, which helped write these rules, which was at the forefront of adhering to most of these rules. There were violations here, there, and yonder, but essentially. And we are excusing ourselves because we can point to wrongdoing. For example, the right-wing press has pointed to Obama having illegally sent drones. And indeed, what he did was illegal. But, it has been called illegal. and it's a stain, but compared to what we're currently doing, it was a relatively small stain, and the objection to it was such that we ceased to exercise any of these activities. Um, so there's the saying, "Shit happens in war." But if you want to go to war with another country, it may or may not be advisable, but then it has to meet some kind of international legal standards, because otherwise we are essentially saying, if the United States, at the forefront of the rules of law, of democracy, of adhering to an orderly world that adheres to treaties and honors the treaties it has signed, can just willy-nilly do anything at once on any given day, then why can't smaller countries do it? So the kind of anarchy that we are creating in our backyard, right? The Monroe Doctrine said that this is our backyard, which we've been ignoring to our cost, by the way, over decades, over several presidencies. We're now sort of taking on and saying, okay, we're going to pick and choose a couple of places, and we're going to, intervene. And this is our right because the Monroe Doctrine says we can do this. The Monroe Doctrine actually doesn't say anything of the kind. Now, I've hopscotched around a little bit in terms of Latin America, but I can't emphasize enough that while the Middle East is, of course, still focus of our attention, why the starvation that is going on everywhere in the world, because USAID, which contributed 40% to the food assistance worldwide and health assistance to World Health Organization, has stopped. So we have created havoc, not just in the military sense, but in the economic sense, in the social sense, in the human rights sense. And I'm afraid that by saying, oh, well, maybe, in 3 years' time, somebody else will be elected and we can get it all back sorted out, I want to end on the depressing note that even if tomorrow a new American government came about, the Congress will get into action and get to play its proper role. The Supreme Court is not, going to be supporting authoritarian measures. Then we would be over this. I think it would take more than a decade to put this genie back in the bottle and restore some kind of sensibilities that the U.S. is a law-abiding, treaty-abiding, and positive partner for the well-being of the world. And I haven't even mentioned climate change, which, by the way, is on everybody's agenda on the world except the United States, because as Trump has said, even in the General Assembly in a speech, he thinks climate change is a hoax. So we'll have to talk about that some other time. Sorry to be so negative, but unfortunately, that's what's happening in the world, and we might as well be realistic. Thank you very much. I'll see you in 2 weeks.